allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before we get going, even with roll call, I'd like to welcome the newly appointed members to the EDA, Chris Thorson and Joseph Matthews. Went through a grueling interview process, and we'll start the hazing process here later today. But welcome aboard and look forward to your contributions.
Thanks for having us.
Chris, if we do the roll call.
Chair Dew,
Here.
Vice Chair Furlong, Member Matthews,
Here.
Member Shifsky is absent today, Member Thorson,
Here.
Council Representative Cole,
Here.
Mayor Mungy,
Here.
and staff ex officio members present today are Executive Director Frandl, Treasurer Community Development Director Howe, EDA Secretary Cherney. Absent today is Business Association Representative Gary.
Okay, thank you. We do have a quorum. We have the agenda in front of you, and if we have any comments, I'll hear those. Otherwise, entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
We have a motion, a second.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Cole. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item 4. We have a couple presentations. We have 2 members, as we have 2 new members. We have 2 members that are departing. And Archie Vickerman and Kevin Fuller that are both with us here in the audience. And I'd like to personally thank you for all of your hard work, participation, guidance over the last several years. And I think that you got an extremely impactful period for the EDA. And again, like to thank you for your service. And I'll hand it over to the mayor, who's
Coming down.
got some prizes for you.
Prizes. No, he's just still hanging around. We can't.
Citizen.
Appreciate all your service. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Yep.
Archie, thank you, sir. Appreciate everything. Thank you so much.
Welcome aboard.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, we got to do
Oh, I
pictures.
got your pictures?
Gotta roll
Oh
down
my
my
God, this is
sleeves
where you
now.
become a mayor.
That's it. This
Yeah.
is official work, huh?
Yeah, this is it. Dedicate new buildings, give out plaques, carry babies.
That's right. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Again, thank you, gentlemen, for your time and dedication and continued support of the city and everything that we're doing. So thanks, Archie. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, attached to the package here are the minutes from the February 14th meeting. And I'll entertain any questions or comments on the minutes. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Member Furlong, and
Second.
second by Mayor Mungy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Minutes are approved. Item 6. Staff, or do I just call the city attorney up? Soren, if you'd like to come teach us, that'd be great.
That's right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chair, how, I'd start with just to sort of, we're going to go through all of this. Do you guys have a timeline in mind? Do you want to be done in 30 minutes, an hour? What's your thought?
3.5 would be great. Well, we have 45, or excuse me, an hour and a half allocated for the meeting.
Okay. This won't
We
take
have
that.
some business to get through. I mean, if you could keep it under 20 would be ideal.
I will try and buzz through it. I think a lot of you have been, sat through this before or are familiar with it. So my name is Soren Maddock. I'm the city attorney. I'm a lawyer with the law firm of Campbell Knutson. I've been coming out to North St. Paul since about 2015. And our firm represents all aspects of the city on the civil side of things. And so One of the things we try and do periodically, and now seemed like a good time with the turnover and with some new staffing, is to just go through some of the ground rules that are just basic tenets to government. And some of them are intuitive, some of them are not, but it's important we follow them. So with that, I'd like to start with, and I'm just going to go through this page by page. I'm not going to read it to you. I'm going to hit the highlights. And my preference is, if you have questions, just stop me, and we'll go over them at that time. So the open meeting law, so meetings like this are subject to the open meeting law, meaning the city has to publish them, has to make the public aware of them. The public, without exception, can come to these meetings. It does not give the public who attend the right to participate, but they do get to sit here and watch the work in progress. And that is an absolute rule unless there's an exception, and we'll get to those in a moment. So I know that sometimes you maybe take public input, but you are not required to. I sometimes get asked, well, if we take input on this one, does it set a precedent? Do we have to do it next time? No, it doesn't set a precedent, but one of the tenets of good governance is if you do something for one, you do it for all, and you try and create as many consistencies as you can. So I do think there are times when it's not necessarily precedential, but you create a custom and norm in what people become accustomed to. So if you do allow folks to speak on items, if you choose not to allow them to speak on another, I would encourage you to be able to explain to the public why not. And if it's that, hey, this is contentious, or I'm tired of hearing from you, that may not be the best explanation. If you have a habit of never allowing the public to speak on items, you have no problems. But if you do, I would encourage you to think about continuing to allow that. Again, you get to decide that, but keep in mind that when you change those customs and norms, you may have some questions to answer. The open meeting law, in addition to when you meet here, applies when you're outside of City Hall. What the open meeting law presumes is that any and all business you guys do can be seen by the public. And so one of the easiest ways to run afoul of the open meeting law is email. So if Brian or Brandy send you an email and you really like what you've read and you decide you want to comment and you reply all, and a discussion ensues amongst the board, you are in violation of the open meeting law. You are having a discussion about city business outside the confines of the EDA meeting. And that applies to not only emails, but applies to phone calls, and it applies to text messages. And we'll go over this a little bit in the Data Practice Act, but it does not matter if you are on a city device, a personal device, a work device. Where you're sending from doesn't matter. The fact that you're conducting and talking about city business does. So I would encourage you, when Brian or staff send you information, to not press reply all. Sometimes I think staff puts you in the blind copy section so you can't reply all, to kind of help you help yourself. But to the extent that isn't happening, I would encourage you to not do the reply all. You can get in just as much trouble by pressing forward if one of you really likes what you've seen and John sends it to Terry, and then Terry says, hey, Robert, got this from John, I think this is a great idea. And if you just daisy chain it around, it has the same effect as a reply all. The idea, again, is at a minimum, at a quorum, you shouldn't be discussing with each other. So if on a Friday night you guys decide to knock off and go down to the bar, you really shouldn't, well, you can't be talking about any EDA matters, at least in a setting of a quorum. I know that sometimes 2 or 3 will maybe get together and some discussions will happen. Just be careful about that, because if the 2 or 3 of you leave and then one of you talks to someone else, you've pulled in a 4th or a 5th, and that in and of itself can be violative of the law. So I know that in every other setting, in your professional life, in your work setting, you meet more than twice a month or once a month. I'm not sure how often you guys meet, and you get a lot of stuff done in between those times. When you're here in your governmental capacity, that just isn't possible. Nothing prevents you from talking to staff and trying to develop ideas, but amongst yourselves, you should not be discussing these topics. Questions on that? A lot of blank looks and a lot of, are you kidding me? Okay. So I am going around. I've met with the council. I'm meeting with a few other committees. Typically, I get to the point and I say, look, there are times when you can close a meeting, but as a committee, you'll never close one. You guys will. You guys do consider property transactions, and under Minnesota law, you can close the meeting, which means you get to exclude the public. That meeting then does need to be tape recorded, and the only thing that can be discussed is the transaction at hand. It can't morph into something else about a different project. We have to specifically notice it for that parcel, which sometimes annoys folks because we want to keep it, quote, on the down low. But the idea is if we're going to go into a closed session, we do need to make sure the public understands why and what. That tape recording, when we are done either negotiating, we've either sold the building or we've bought a building or a parcel or we've abandoned it, that tape recording becomes public. And I offer that up right now just to remind folks that I've seen in the closed session, it gets a little casual. Things are said. We talk about the seller in a certain way that we maybe wouldn't have in an open forum. Keep in mind that that tape becomes public and the public can request it and they will get it at some point. So I would strongly encourage you to keep your comments the same as if you were in an open forum. The reason we get to close a meeting is because government should be able to buy or sell land strategically and with some forethought without informing the person who may be interested in it or selling it without knowing all of our negotiating strategies or what we're willing to pay or sell it for. So we do get to try and save the taxpayers money with the closed session, but it's not meant to go beyond that. That's the only setting I can really see you guys going into a closed session. I don't see you going into a closed session for any personnel matters or things of that nature. Questions on the open meeting law? Brian?
I was wondering if you could give me some clarity, if I understand it properly. When you come back from a closed session, are you supposed to give like a general overview of what you talked about, not the details, but what should you talk about or how should you cover that?
Yeah, that's a good, I should back it up even a little bit more. When you're in a closed session, you cannot vote. Now, what you can do is start to gain consensus, and I'll ask, well, are we interested in buying it? Yes, but we won't make a motion on that. You know, is this the price range you guys would be comfortable with? Yes, but we won't make a motion on that. So staff gets direction from the closed session. We do take on closed sessions, there will be bare bones minutes, went into closed session, discussed the property, so on and so forth. There's different criteria for different things. The statute specifically talks on open meetings. We're supposed to take minutes on all action items. The statute talks about if you close it for, say, review of a staff member like Brian from the council, then we need to come out with certain other findings at the next meeting. There isn't that same requirement for, or as specific a requirement for closed meetings on purchase of real estate. I do typically have something along the lines of a motion and a second to close the meeting. The meeting was closed to discuss the purchase of X land. Council provided staff direction and off we go. So not a lot more than that. That defeats the purpose of the closed session otherwise.
So can you clarify, if we're discussing, let's just say hypothetically, the purchase of a property within the city, and we want to keep a kind of closed hand on what that number is.
Yep.
As the EDA, we need to authorize that number. And did you say we cannot do that authorization during closed session?
No.
Or
Well, where it gets tricky is what the best legal advice is you cannot make a motion in a closed session.
Okay.
Because what the law says is if you make a motion, we're supposed to, in our minutes, keep track of all those items. So I guess sort of the legal workaround on that is what we've said is, look, you can't make a motion, but it sounds like you guys want to buy parcel X. Are you okay if we begin negotiations with parcel X? Each of you says, or the majority of you say, yeah, no, that makes sense. We want to do it. It's a good redevelopment opportunity. Okay? They're asking $1 million. We reasonably think the range is 800 to 1.2. We're feeling rather bullish. We'll come in at a $900,000 offer, knowing that that might not get it done, but that'll kick the can and get things going. Are you guys okay if we start the negotiations there, knowing that anything we finalize, we have to bring back to you? But, you know, we start to create some parameters, but you don't actually take a full-blown motion on it. We just start to get what we feel is direction. You get comfortable with it. And if we start bringing back paperwork, that's going to have to get done in open session.
Right, so it's staff direction, and if they come back with a purchase agreement, that's done in open session, and that's where the financial approval is provided.
100%.
Got it, okay.
Yep, yep. Other questions on that? Okay. And that does come up once in a while for you guys, and we have had questions on closed sessions in the past. I do advise you when you go into closed session procedurally, as the chair, to make a record of everyone who's in the closed session, going around what board members are in there and what staff, just so there's a record if there's ever questions about who is in the room and why. And then there is, and I help either Jenny or Brandy prepare the actual motion. There have been some advisory opinions. I think they're a bit ticky-tack, but they're out there. It's not just a motion to close the meeting. It's a motion pursuant to Minnesota statute blankety blank to consider the purchase of property located at so-and-so, motion second, and off we go. And we usually prepare that language for you ahead of time, so you just script it and read it and you're compliant.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Could we simply refer to the property with its PID instead of location?
Sure. I mean, you can. I mean, the argument would be that a PID is better than an address. You could look it up legally. I think there's been some discussion on it. It's kind of like advertising properties with their legal description. It's arguably the most accurate way to describe a property, but arguably the least helpful way to describe the property. And so I think you just have to step back and say, yes, we're using the PID, and why is that? Is it to hide it? And how do you feel about that if you get called on it? So, yes, I think you can. I think, you know, when you start knocking on the door, I guess the question is whether a governmental entity is really going to be able to keep a secret anyway, in terms of, hey, the purchaser or the seller was approached by the EDA. So, but yes, the point blank answer is I think you can use the PID. All right, page 3, data practice. Kind of along the lines of the open meeting law, keep in mind that anything and everything you guys do as it relates to your capacity as an EDA member is subject to the Data Practice Act. And so what that means is if Brian sends out an email to you and says, hey, here's what's going to be on the meeting, and you reply, or if you get an email from someone who has questions or staff, what the law says is any and all communication or data and material you have as it relates to your capacity as an EDA member is presumed public. There are exceptions, but you should start with the proposition that it's public, meaning that if the public asks for it, you have to give it to them. And it does not matter, again, if that's from your personal computer, if the city's giving you a computer or iPad, if it's from your work computer, work phone, personal phone, it doesn't matter. What the Data Practice Act says is if you have delivered or have data that is public in nature, regardless of what device you have on it, it is presumed public. And so I would encourage you to keep that in mind as you either email or things of that nature. Where I've seen folks get in trouble with this is a spirited debate on email, and they did not have any realization that that email can now be distributed to the public. And things that have been said, kind of the brave by keyboard, can't get unsaid, and that becomes a public document. So I just encourage you to kind of keep that in mind as you move around. We are not required to produce data, so if someone says, I want a log of all the phone calls and what was said between Tim and Terry, we don't have to produce that. It doesn't exist. You can't recreate the words. We don't have to contact Tim and Terry and say, can you give us a summary of what was said? The answer is we don't have to produce data. So this really pretty much applies to written communication and written materials. There are some nuances in there, but that's by and large what you should keep in mind.
So as a matter of practice, should we all, since most of us are not, other than the council liaison, city manager, we don't operate generally on city emails. Should we have a city email for exclusive use? For
This came
EDA
up in
functions
another commission.
to keep our personal stuff out of discovery?
Yeah.
Yeah, we are in the process of creating new emails for everybody, all commissions and council.
And I would strongly encourage it. Because if you get a data practice request and you've been disciplined to use your city email, it's so much easier to sort it, and it doesn't, depending, I've had, the story I always relay is I had someone who was in banking, several pretty high up, had to do certain clearances and things of that nature, and they'd been using their work email because it was just simpler. They only wanted one email account. It was a very sad day when that person and their employer discovered that because they had been using that system, they could get into and start searching to see what emails had been sent, and the protocols on all that were not a fun day for that person. So I strongly encourage you to be disciplined to use your city account, and also don't do the belt and suspender of carbon copying your work email. Just use the city email and be done with it.
Okay.
Other questions on that one? Again, keep in mind text messages, that's communication. A lot of folks will, well, but Soren, it was a text, it wasn't an email. No, it's communication. If there's a sort of communication I have forgot about that I'm not aware of, it counts. So it doesn't matter whether it's a text or an email or a written letter or any of that stuff, like what he's doing right now. Yeah, exactly. Right, yeah. So just keep that in mind. We do get data practice requests. It's not like, oh, that'll never happen. You should assume it will, because it usually does at some point. And the moment you deal with something controversial on whether it should be bought or sold or something like that, you can just presume we're going to get data practice requests. And candidly, when we're dealing with certain buildings, some owners of property are more sophisticated than others. They'll just do a little snoop and do some due diligence and say, well, let's see what the city's thinking about on this one. And they're well within their rights. Someone doesn't have to disclose why they're asking. They have an absolute right to ask, and we have an absolute right, or we're mandated to produce that data. So there are certain things we can keep private. If we do an appraisal on a building or on land, we get to hold that. We don't have to disclose that right away. Any of the negotiations on real estate, we can keep to ourselves for a while. But I would be careful about that. If for some reason you know about it because there was a discussion, but you start banging off those emails to folks who you think are going to keep it quiet, you've now made those public. And so I would be if it's stated in that closed session, keep it in that closed session. Do not create a separate record of it. It's my advice on that. Any questions on data practice? Okay. Good, then I'm assuming everyone's up on it. Conflicts of interest. I would like to believe a lot of these are intuitive, and then we start working through scenarios. What your appointment to the EDA suggests is that you are here in the interest of public. This is not an opportunity to create another income stream. And so when the conflict of interest stuff was drafted, what they found was people found their way onto city council or other boards to feed contracts either to their own business and or to relatives or things of that nature. If there is any chance that your business or family are associated with a contract or are able to make money, my suggestion is you should at least at a minimum abstain from it and disclose it and walk away from it. That vote, not participate in it. And candidly, what I am seeing is many councils and other contracting entities are in do business with some of those folks just because of the appearance of it, that once I've been elected or appointed, now the contracts go there. That is not necessarily an absolute, but I'm seeing more and more folks do that. So if there's a chance that you're going to make money, whether it's yourself or someone in the household or a close family member, that is an interest that you should disclose immediately. It is something that I can help provide advice on in terms of whether it's a strict conflict or just an appearance and sort of a path forward. I can tell you that law enforcement is looking at conflict of interest a little bit more seriously. I have seen recently folks prosecuted for it, and they weren't necessarily the biggest contracts in the world, but the entities took it serious because it's tax dollars and they don't want to encourage it, and they're sending a message. So I would put that out there. There are instances when you may have a non-contract situation, when we're not talking about buying or selling something, but if there's something before you that's just an approval. A very easy one for me to highlight would be at a city council level. If Terry's the applicant to get a variance on his home to build a deck and he's sitting there as the mayor, I would say, Terry, you don't get to vote on that. So that's an instance where there was no financial gain to him, but he's directly interested in that action item. If there's something like that before you as a group where you are directly related to it or even tangentially, I would encourage you to recuse yourself, not talk about it, and abstain on that item. Questions on conflict?
Being a relatively small town, it's not hard to find conflicts,
I agree.
whether it's, customers or friends or distant family members, what have you. Is the critical point the vote for abstention? Should you, or are there degrees of it?
I would say
If
that
there's no direct conflict per se, you're not going to benefit, can you still comment it, but then maybe abstain just as a matter of good measure on a vote? Or do you just,
I've advised that the moment you realize you have a conflict, really you sit there as, because if you're going to abstain, you are not nothing, but you are the same as a resident. And a resident doesn't get to sit up there and trying to influence the vote. And so if you're commenting on it, you have gained a point of influence that the average public does not have. So I think, legally speaking, if we were in front of a judge defending and fighting it out, I would sit and say, look, it's the vote that matters. You can talk about influence, but that's kind of squishy. It gives me a much cleaner position to make when I can say, look, this is when the conflict was identified, and from that point forward, they did nothing, and they abstained. The whole influence, now take your vote, that can become problematic in my opinion.
Okay.
And I do get smaller communities, it does come up. I had a community that had a council member who owned the one mechanic shop in town, and another council member towed cars, and they were the only tow in town. And so, we're not going to punish people because you've chosen to provide public service, and there are ways around that, but it just has to be fully disclosed so we can work with it. In those instances, they were allowed to contract with the city, but they had to abstain. There was an affidavit that had to be filled out before each bid or bill, and it had to be unanimous by the body to approve the bill. And so on some of those, there are ways around it. But candidly, in general, we should just steer away from it and fully abstain and think about whether there's another way to do it. But I do understand in a small town, keep it local, spend here, and you shouldn't be punished just because you're with the public service, but just don't cross that line. This is one of the more serious ones. Next page, page 5, gift law. No, this doesn't mean that your family can't give you presents anymore. This is usually where any of you in sales start shaking your head in disbelief, but if you are offered Twins tickets, Vikings tickets, all of the fun stuff, you're at the bar and someone says, can I buy you a beer? You have to start thinking twice on all of that. If your brother offers you tickets to the game, you're fine. If that same brother is before you trying to sell you land, honestly, you start to have a potential problem. When you go to the bar and someone starts schmoozing you a little bit, buys you a couple beers, and it turns out they're on the agenda next week, you have a problem. And so all of the things we do in normal private business transactions, get to know someone, create a relationship, butter them up with a little experience, all of that is off the table for governmental folks. Just is not a way we can do it. It needs to be straight up. So again, holidays, Christmas, birthdays, friends and families can still give you presents, but all of the other stuff, you need to seriously ask yourself who it is that's buying it and what you're getting. One of the things that will sometimes come up on this is, well, but Soren, I know he doesn't currently have a project in town, but he might in a year. We're going to go on this trip and do all these things. If 6 months after that trip, that person is before you and you are making a decision on their application, you have to ask yourself whether that trip 6 months ago may have influenced your decision here and now. And I would argue it does. And if nothing else, you have a perception problem at a minimum. And so the whole, it's not here right now, but it was 6 months ago, or it might be 6 months. I would encourage you to turn down any and all of that. Any questions on you don't get gifts anymore? Nobody gave Tim anything anyway.
Piece of my mind. once.
Got a New Testament.
Yeah, that's more of a suggestion than anything. Yeah. Role of the city manager. I haven't seen too many problems with this, but it's a good reminder that whether it's the city council or the EDA, Brian sits here as the executive director. My preference is, unless Brian has told you to do it a different way, any and all questions should go through Brian, and he can distribute them. If he said, no, look, this kind of stuff should go directly to Brandy, so be it. As the executive director, he gets to decide that, not necessarily you individually or as a board. It is important that Brian is kept in the loop and decides how city resources and management are directed. And that's just an absolute, and that's what the statute requires, and that's just good governance to respect the chain of command on that. There's other stuff pointed in here, but Brian gets to decide what staff work on what, and that's period. The other aspect of that, you know, and from a policy perspective, if you guys are interested in buying and selling, Brian may engage Dan or someone else to crunch the numbers, but it's important to remember that Brian's ultimately going to be held responsible by the council for all management of finances and things of that nature. So it's important to just keep in mind Brian's role in presenting you that information. I haven't seen problems with that in the past. It's just a good reminder for today. Okay? Good, you guys are easy. So, rules of order. I was listening to Robert call this meeting to order and run through the approvals. You guys have a good handle on how this is done. You know that from my perspective, Robert's rules, not your rules, but the other Robert's rules, I think are one of the worst documents out there for bodies of this size. I pretty continuously say that. It's really meant for a legislative body or something like that. I really think we could make it a lot easier. I don't believe in using rules and procedural things for the minority to stall something. Sometimes you'll see at the Capitol, you know, it's held up in a committee, or we can't get it out of this, can't get out of that. That has no place in local government. If the majority of you want to do something, then that's how it should be. And so there's no procedural gimmicks that can take place for a minority to hold something up. Majority governs, and it's just that simple. And that's how I will always advise on issues of Robert's Rules of Order. You'll see that there are some motions in there. One that kind of comes up, so as you guys know, you make a motion, you second, and you vote on it. And you need a majority of the quorum present to do it. And if that happens, you've made an action. I would say the most common question I get is, hey, we did something, I want to reconsider. I don't recall if that's come up here or not. One technical measure on the motion to reconsider is it's supposed to be done at the same meeting, not the next meeting. So if you make a motion and you have buyer's remorse and you come back at the next meeting and you want to make a motion to reconsider, what I'd say is it's too late. You can't reconsider a motion at a following meeting. Further, if the motion you made here was to enter into a contract and do something, you cannot procedurally undo that contract. You're legally bound. And if staff is on their game, you tell them to execute a contract tonight, it's executed tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, and in a couple weeks or a month, you say, you know, that was a bad deal. I've now talked to my constituents. I can see clear. That's a bad deal. The answer is, candidly, too bad you're stuck with a bad deal. There's no procedural mechanism to undo a lawful contract. Those are the most common things I see with Robert's Rules or questions I get. Candidly, and I know we kind of buzzed through it, but trying to respect the time, that's really all I had for you, and prepared to answer any questions. Otherwise, candidly, in the past, I think you guys have run a pretty tight ship. You guys know what you're doing. You've got good experience up here. So I'd stand for any questions, or I'd leave you alone and let you do some business.
Anybody have any questions?
Maybe quorum, might be short, quorum. Do we?
Well, if you don't have a quorum, you don't have a meeting. And so one of the questions I'll get is, well, can we just meet to do this? Well, you can sit there as less than a quorum and do whatever you want, but you don't have a meeting, and you can't make any motions, and you can't do any business. I have a little concern if you do stick around and talk. I don't think that's violative of the law, because technically you don't have a meeting. There's no open meeting law concern. You're here. But I do get concerned if things get discussed, does that lay over to the next meeting, things of that nature. I typically do advise that, look, you should, if you don't have a quorum, you should just disband and repost the meeting. And you can redo it as a special meeting if there's something of pressing timing. You need, the statute says 3 days, but really what you need is 4 days to get a special meeting. You don't count the day you post it, but so if you post it on a Tuesday, you'd count Wednesday, Thursday, you could have the meeting on Friday. So that's, if you don't have a quorum, you don't have a meeting.
Is Zoom off the table now?
It is, the legislature's looking at it. Now, I say it is, it's off the table like what we were used to. So in my opinion, and I don't know why they did it this way, but they did, is pre-COVID, if someone took a vacation, so think about, I think Candy was in Alabama one time. As long as we have notice of that ahead of time and post it with the proper timelines, and Candy or whoever's in a public place, we can still do a Zoom meeting. But the whole, it's Friday, I got sick, I might have COVID, or I've got a sniffle and I just don't feel safe coming in, don't want to spread it. You don't get to do that because we haven't had time to post it with all the timelines. Now, the question that the follow-up is, well, look, I feel good enough, I'd like to participate. I have, and I think we'll find out whether I'm right on this or not, I have allowed people to come in via Zoom to participate, to talk as if they were still here, but not vote. I used to say, no, you can't participate, you can just sort of watch. You know, I've loosened up on that. It causes me some consternation, but I think plenty of folks are doing it. And again, as long as you don't vote, I don't see the harm in it. You're participating, that's all. There is some talk at the legislature that they may open it back up a little bit and allow us to do remotes 3 times a year. Why 3? I don't know. There were concerns during COVID that local units of government were violating open meeting law with Zoom meetings, phoning in, that maybe they were being influenced by someone you couldn't see in the room, all of those sorts of things. To me, it was unfounded paranoia. I thought it was a nice way to do it. I do understand the idea of, look, to truly honor the open meeting, let's make sure we're here in City Hall, this public can attend. But I do think, I'm not a big fan of Zoom, but I certainly, now having gone through COVID and the rest, acknowledge the simplicity it can bring to meetings. So that's the rule surrounding Zoom at this point.
So we publish our agenda with a Zoom access. Is that simply for viewing, or?
It's for the public to be able to join if they want to, so the rules don't apply.
Which, that's fine. What I'm talking about is your
Is us,
attendance.
right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. The public can attend and you can choose to let them in via Zoom. Some discussion, candidly, for some communities who have opened it up, they like the hybrid option. It feels more open, if you will. You can attend here, you can stay home, you can participate via Zoom. The only time I've seen that backfire is when we have a technological glitch. And what the idea is, we've said you'll be able to participate via Zoom. Don't worry, you don't have to come in. And then something happens and it goes down, and you know, it's never purposeful, but it happened, and now that person didn't get to participate, doesn't get the phone in. It's a problem. So some folks, just because they've had technology issues, have taken away the Zoom option. Chris?
So just regarding the quorum, because this came up a while back, I don't remember why. So, but we have 7 board members. We have the 5 appointees, including myself, and then we have the mayor and we have the council representative. That makes up the 7-member board, and a quorum is 4.
Correct.
4, at a count, sorry. And we did get a little sideways a while back where, to your point of the side meetings, if we sit and meet with a developer or somebody else and have discussions, we cannot have 4 voting members at the table.
That's correct. I think best practice is to have 2, candidly, but if you run it up to 3, you're technically under a quorum.
Not necessarily related to what you covered today, but one thing with a couple of issues that have come up, and this might be for staff, but we may need to look at our bylaws.
Yeah.
We created the bylaws 10-plus years ago, and I assume they were fairly generic. I don't,
There's a standard template out there that when I review them, I'm like, yep, I know where they got these.
but there was a couple things in there that may or may not be pertinent any longer.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to put a couple other things in there. That, I don't know that there's any rush on that, but
That's something I can work with Brandy on, or however Brian chooses to delegate it. But there have been some statutory updates and some things that are, if nothing else, worth taking a look at. And if there's things in there that you feel like, hey, this is a hindrance, if we have the option, I'd like to remove it, we can start to answer some of those questions.
okay, so yeah, our current bylaws are approved on the 9th of February 2010, so they're a little over 12 years old. And maybe we'll put on, I'll just cover it under the chair portion today ask everybody to review the bylaws and bring back to the table any thoughts or comments. And
The one thing I would say about EDA bylaws is when I look at bylaws or rule of governance for cities, it's pretty wide open. They get to kind of handle city councils how you want. EDAs, there are very strict statutory guidelines on what your bylaws have to include. You can certainly go beyond that in some situations, but there are some strict rules of guidance on bylaws for EDA, so it's not a free-for-all.
right, and I don't have the specifics, but I remember looking through here, and to your point, there were some actions or things that we wanted to contemplate as an EDA that weren't within our authority
Okay.
by those bylaws. And I think when they were originally drafted, the mayor at the time, or whoever it was keeping a short leash on us, so
Sounds like Terry.
we've matured.
Can I ask a question about the bylaws? So how does that relate to the ordinance that enacts the EDA? So does the city council have to approve those bylaws?
I don't recall, I'd have to take a look at that. The ordinance on enacting, my recollection just simply says we're gonna have an EDA and then we have to develop the bylaws for it. I don't think the ordinance is your bylaws.
Right, there's more to the ordinance than that. Maybe we can.
Yeah, and I'm sure there is more to it, but usually your bylaws are your operational document.
Yeah, I guess my question was, if the EDA creates its own bylaws, it sounded like, by what you just said, that it had to have approval by the council.
The last set were approved by the council, and I would suspect these need to be as well,
That would make sense to me.
because most of our actions require council approval anyways, either by city ordinance or statute or what have you. But there are some things that I think that, given a hard look, we should probably have some authorities or things included in our bylaws that aren't presently there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have nothing else on that. Chris?
Okay, any other questions?
Oh,
I said, for the benefit of our viewers and everyone that's new here, let's define what a quorum is rather than just use that word.
oh,
So thank you for bringing that up. It's apparently 4 out of 7.
it is. It is.
Staying on quorum, gain some clarity. Quarterly, we have a meeting with the planning commission. It's more of an informational meeting. But it's published, it's out there. I don't even know if, is there an agenda published?
My understanding that we stopped doing that unless a special circumstance came up to
So we
continue that?
stopped, I still have them on my calendar, so we've got one coming up here shortly.
I think we scrubbed them.
Okay.
Specifically because we ran into a quorum problem, and the idea was to keep each of the groups in tune with what the other were doing, and we were, in fact, in violation of quorum issues by bringing both full commissions together.
Because it was established as an informational meeting, to your point, to bring both sides together. And then there was confusion of, well, do both sides have to have a quorum? Can you have a conversation without one side having a quorum? And it sounds like we're not having the meetings going forward, so never mind.
Right, it was like, okay, well, each group can send two, and then we're like, well, what's the point? That defeats the purpose, so.
I mean, I have seen joint meetings where you publish them and you say, look, the EDA and the Planning Commission are gonna meet together. It's an informational meeting. Now, from my perspective, it's a meeting or it's not a meeting. The 1 foot in thing doesn't work. And so even though you're not gonna, quote, take any action, it's hard to suggest that you as a body aren't discussing city topics and city business. You're discussing either what's right in front of you or what you just dealt with. It's city business. So to me, if you have a quorum, it should have been published, pure and simple. Now, so then it becomes this, well, shoot, you know, the Planning Commission showed up, but only 3 of you guys showed up. Now what do? Publish it as an EDA meeting and a Planning Commission meeting? Do we just have a Planning Commission meeting where you guys just sit and listen and get talked at? It can get goofy if we don't follow through on what we said. But if you want to have quarterly meetings and publish them as such, I don't have a problem with that. And then the topic is, we're gonna just have a discussion, update, make sure we're on the same page, but make sure you get a quorum.
On both sides.
Yeah, yeah. Which can be challenging at times. I mean, it just can.
Implement the barroom rule.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
Yeah. No, I don't.
Soren, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks. Good luck, gentlemen. Let me stick around.
Okay, we'll push forward on the agenda. Next item on the agenda is item 7, meeting open to the public. I don't see anyone in the room. Do we have anybody online? Okay. Item 8, action items. Pizza Factory, I'll hand it over. Do you want me to kick it off, or?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so we had discussion, and it's identified in our minutes from last meeting about Pine Tree Center. One of the, as just to catch up a little bit, Pine Tree Center is essentially vacant with the exception of one tenant, and that is the Pizza Factory. There was some question as to the disposition of that property and that business. One of the takeaways was, let's try to engage with that business owner and find out what their intent is. Can we keep them in town? Were they going to stay there at the Pizza Factory until it fell down around them? What was their plan? So we did meet, we had the opportunity to meet with Cal. I don't remember Cal's last name, but we met with
Almquist, does that sound?
Alquist, along with another property owner in town, to try to facilitate an opportunity to keep them within the city and move them actually downtown here. So we met with Tracy Luther, who is the current owner of, I don't know the address of the property, but it's the old TCF Bank building on the corner here, OSI Therapy, I think most recent tenant in there. Took a walk through there to see what the parties thought, whether it would be a potential option to move that business. And both parties seemed amenable, so we, I'd asked staff, and just by, the EDA folks in attendance was myself and Terry Furlong. We'd asked staff to reach out and get a proposal for somebody that could come up with a kind of a rough spatial drawing and what have you, to see if it will work for both parties, and then figure out what steps will go from there. So, and I think that staff was able to get something here.
Yeah, I contacted a couple, 4 or 5 different architecture groups to try to get a quote, and 2 of them that I reached out to, they never returned my call. The other one, Patrick Blees, his company it's a little bit outside of the scope of his architectural firm. But he did recommend a couple of them, this Little Box Architects being one of them. They primarily specialize in sort of small-scale restaurants in downtown, so it seems like a good fit in that. He's also done a couple of pizza places recently. So the scope that you have before you is basically an hourly not to exceed to come out and do a site inspection, take the measurements, get a feel for the space, and then do basically a lease area drawing that would be reviewed by this body and by Cal.
So the proposal we have in front of us, and ultimately what I think we'll be looking for a motion is to approve engagement with this firm. I took a look at their website. I agree. I mean, it looks like they've done a few pizza places, so they should at least have, and it looks like they've got reasonable experience in this type of stuff. But the EDA's function in this, from my perspective, is to, rather than, we have, of course, the choice of doing nothing. Or, one of our primary charters, again, is to, attract and retain businesses. And in this instance, we're trying to retain a business as well as, create some more activity downtown. So what I'm proposing as the EDA is that we authorize some funds to get the process started and get the parties moving and show them that they, hopefully we're able to show that there's a win-win deal for those parties, and then we can step away and they can take it from there. They may wind up back at our table for other items, but at least to get the ball rolling and see if we can keep this business viable in the city of North St. Paul. So I'll certainly entertain any thoughts or comments or questions. Yes, sir.
Do we as an EDA have a set policy established about helping existing businesses stay or attracting new businesses? I know that it's in our purpose or goals, okay? But is there a formal process where, being that I've been in the business association for 25 some years, we've always encouraged people to come to North St. Paul and find ways in which to do that and to retain those that are here. And I am all for keeping Cal in our town. He's been a great, but there are others in this town also that I have equal concern about keeping them in their town. So I just want to know, is there a formal process that any and all businesses that want to retain themselves in our town have that opportunity to go in front of the EDA, for example, to seek help? Maybe there's no way, as you just pointed out, we have the right to say no, or we can go forward. But I want to know, is there really a formal policy and a process to assist anyone else that's going to come before us for help?
I think the answer to that is generally no. There is not a formal process. I know that over the years we've helped a number of businesses, and I've also heard that grumblings where there were some businesses that say, well, why didn't the EDA help me? I can tell you that, at least from my perspective, oftentimes the businesses that asked why they didn't get help, they never hit the table. We had no idea, that they had an issue or concern or needed assistance. And so I think we try to be proactive about understanding what's happening in the town, but we don't have in terms of a checklist, in terms of, does this business or individual meet the criteria for assistance from the EDA? They're really just all handled on their own individual merits and as they're presented to us. In this particular case, I'll say Cal didn't come to us. We went to him, but that was a byproduct of us wanting to know what was going on at Pine Tree. And as a result of that, here's a business that when we talked to him, he said, yeah, I'd kind of like to stay in business. And my words, not his, but I kind of like to stay, but things are falling apart around me, and And we said, well, what can we do about it? And that's where we sit today. So, I would encourage any, we have limited funds. We have funds, but limited funds. But any business that is in a position that needs assistance that the EDA might be able to provide, whether it's monetary, guidance, just connecting the dots. We've helped plenty of business just connecting the dots and not spending any money. I'd invite them to, reach out, whether they come to a meeting or approach EDA member outside of a meeting or whatever makes sense, or come talk to staff. But to your specific question, no, we don't have there's no specific criteria that says, we will run down this checklist. The only time we've had that is when, I guess, in conjunction with council, we were tasked with distributing, I think they were CARES Act funds, if I'm not mistaken. We did through assistance of council and other communities, had a fairly specific checklist criteria on how those dollars were distributed, but that's the only time I've had anything like that I'm aware of.
You came to our business association and made a great presentation about the EDA, and I think one of the things I took away from that was using the city manager as the focal point, contact city management to get that ball rolling. And maybe that's the clarification I'm looking for. That may be our, how do we come up with a process that's fair to everyone, that they're going to be heard, other than, hey, we've recognized that we want to keep Cal in town, and I do, but it's like we're deciding to reach out to him because of his circumstance. I get it, but we got to make sure that that's open for other businesses to at least bring to our attention here at the EDA.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as I think most people here know, over the course of, I'll say, the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a bit of musical chairs in the city manager seat. I think even at the time I spoke to the business association, we had John Stark on board, and at the time, we felt we were on a good path to have the city manager / executive director of the EDA be that focal point, because that was, John had a very strong background in economic development and what have you. I'm not suggesting that Brian doesn't, but I'm not, I don't want to suggest that he's the primary contact for all those issues either. I think that, maybe the best thing I can offer or suggest is that, to your point, we make periodic, whether we do something in the city newsletter that reminds local businesses, hey, the EDA is potentially here to help with X, Y, and Z. That could be an opportunity. It could be maybe more regular visits to the business association if those are the parties that we're trying to touch, whether that's quarterly or what have you. Yes, sir.
At one point, we had EDA director or whatever. Kim Ann was part of that group and started the BRE, business retention and expansion. And we'd go out to the businesses, and I think the word was getting out there that, how do we keep you here? How can you expand here? I think at that time there was a momentum going, that information was getting out there, that the EDA was, at least making a point to try to get businesses to come to us for that information.
Yeah, I think, and I do think that's the key. My own view is that anybody that finds themselves, a business that finds themselves in a position where, they may be forced to leave the city or leave their current location or even shut down as far as that goes, and need some help. I mean, any and all are invited if they think that we can help them in any way. Part of what this group is really intended to provide beyond, some limited ability to provide funds at times is to help connect the dots for folks and provide, guidance with either the expertise or the connections that folks on the board have. So it really is an open invitation to all businesses, and I think that if we want to be more proactive, I think to your point, unless I'm mishearing you, is that we maybe just doing a more affirmative reach out to say, hey, we're here if you need help.
Well, I think that is exactly what we need, because we don't want to have this perception that we're picking and choosing on our own. I think we are all here to promote economic development, and we, by definition, we've also included that in retaining existing businesses and doing whatever we can to make that happen. If we have that opportunity to clarify it for those that are out there looking, that's what we should at least provide a forum for. And if that is the city manager, that's what we'd point to, I think that's a great first contact. It sure isn't the building inspector.
No, yeah, again, I don't want to suggest that it is the city manager. It may or may not be, and Brian, you're welcome to speak to that if you like. I mean, my gut tells me that, we have a community development director now in Brandy, and I think she would be a more appropriate contact. That's my personal opinion, which we didn't have in the past. We've been lacking a staff member, rotating city managers, so it's been a little difficult, but I think it's Brandy. Would be first point?
I would agree with that, and then we take it to the next level by involving myself and bringing it to the board here as well.
Okay. Not to get too far off the agenda topic here, but I think with that, can we ask staff to maybe draft something that could be presented at the next meeting that emphasizes our reach out to the business community, something along the lines if there is anything we can help them with, and we can work on the wording of it, but please encourage them to come have a discussion with the EDA.
You mean something for the newsletter, perhaps?
I'm thinking for the newsletter initially, and then, we could probably expand that. I think we know a couple people in the Business Association. We can expand that and make a trip, to their upcoming meeting, or, whether it's the next one or the one after, and at least get a 5-minute slot or something to extend that to the group as well.
Hopefully, I think far in between, hopefully we're not dealing with this situation a whole lot of helping businesses move and retention. I think our main focus is to build a product around the city where businesses aren't struggling. So I hope this isn't a 10 small businesses we're dealing with a year of trying to help them retain, stay in North St. Paul, because if we get to that point as a city, we're doing other things wrong. Our number one goal is to build a product, a foundation around these small businesses. And if we're doing that, hopefully this part of it will be minimized.
Agreed. So right now, the agenda item is discussing an expenditure of not to exceed $2,800, 140 an hour, not to exceed $2,800. That would come out of our EDA funds to help move the ball in this specific situation. From my perspective, again, win-win. We keep a business in town. We get a building that's right now full of I was going to say junk, but Mr. Luther would call them gifts and antiquities or something. Gifts and collectibles, I think he calls them. But get another viable business in the downtown district. So with that, I'll entertain comments on whether we should do this or not.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the spending of that $2,800 up to have this study done.
Second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve, to direct staff to approve the proposal for Little Box Architecture. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. And so do I, Brandy, do I need to execute this or consider?
Imagine that Brian will sign it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, next topic. Discussion items, Pine Tree Center. Do you want me to brief that, or do you?
Well, I think you've already touched on a good deal of it. Since our last meeting, I reached out to Mark, I forget his last name, with Crossroads Realty to have him kind of make a contact with the owner of that property. And he has done so and has learned that he does intend to sell. I haven't heard anything else from him about details on that. I know that there's some code enforcement issues with the property as well, but that's basically all that I have for information at this time.
Yeah, so my understanding is he doesn't intend to sell. He, in fact, I understand, gave Crossroads a number that he was going to list it at somewhere in the $1.1 million range. This, the property over there is, as we know, is in quite a state of blight, I would say, for lack of a better description. And this is a situation where, as the EDA, we could, do one of a number of things. We can do nothing and let the market do what it does. We could get involved and attempt to steer it in some direction. Or we could, get involved formally, or we could just informally get involved and, kind of put the word out to developers and folks that we're aware of. Maybe the current owner would have let us list it on our available property sites or something like that. But certainly would like to hear any comments from others on what, if anything, we should do there.
Sorry, reaching back into my emails, I did see that his conversation, Mark Young's conversation with Terry, the owner. Terry believes that it's a good site for residential, which the city also believes it is. He anticipates that it could be 40 plus or minus condominiums that could fit on that site. We would have to do an analysis to determine actually what could be used on the site. He's also looking for TIF money if it's available for a redevelopment project, and you're right, it was 1.1 million that he's looking to sell it for.
Not yet. I didn't hear the part about the TIF.
Well, TIF money could be available, so I think he's getting he
Oh, okay. Well,
wasn't part of that discussion, so it's hard to exactly say.
so, thoughts, comments? I'll add one thing on, that site is identified as potential housing. And we do have a fairly significant shortfall in our affordable housing capacity within the city as well. At least from my perspective, that would be a prime candidate, but.
How big of a parcel is that, as far as a couple acres, or what are we dealing with, what size?
I think it's a couple. I can check quick.
While she's looking that up, others?
Well, my comment would be, if we are seeking a a move for the pizza place, that pretty much leaves that site completely vacant. And I would say the market will just take care of that. I have faith that the market will step up and buy out whatever the person is seeking, because I don't know if we need to be involved in that, but that's just my point.
Others?
Just under 2 acres.
Just under 2, okay. Well, I think, one of the things that we experienced with the Lilly property, and I say this for the benefit of you two that weren't here at the time, but we had originally engaged, because we didn't have the staff or the expertise, so we had originally engaged the St. Paul Port Authority. They have a division that does this type of stuff. And one of the things that, at least that I took away from that, when they came in and talked about the options, and certainly, let the seller do what the seller does and let the market do what the market wants to do. One of the things they suggested that is not always a good position to take, because what inevitably can wind up happening is, sure, you can get something that's great for the community, additive in terms of a tax base, additive in terms of what the vision for the city is, where the shortcomings might be within the city. And by that I mean, if you have a housing need and somebody buys a building and just decides to put, a general business, continued general business purpose in there, that may not be fulfilling some of the needs of the city. Or you can attempt to control the outcome to some extent. At the end of the day, I think they counseled us to tell us that at the end of the day, it's still the market, it's still the open market that's going to do that. And the only, our involvement in that case was just to help guide, control, and they suggested at the outset that you will likely be presented with a set of choices. And then you get to make a choice, what's best for the city. And that, and in fact, is exactly what happened. And if you don't do that, it could, it could dangle in the wind for a long time. It could, a lot of other things could happen. Some bad things could happen, I guess. So that to me would be the kind of the difference between attempting to not dictate the outcome, but control the outcome, I guess, at some level. And they were pretty adamant about that. And
What is that zoned there?
It's R2, which is kind of open for everything. It can be residential, it could be commercial. It's a
And
mix.
we have another
Sorry, I said R2,
business,
it's MU.
we have another business right next door to it that is, and the one further down, affordable, or they used to be called affordable automotive, but all of those are commercial sites, so. And then you look across the street to Oakdale and it's all, apartments, so the viability of being either one is there.
Yeah, and it's got good, that I would say compared to, if we were just to do a comparison, and from my own experience, if you look at the Lilly building, and we talked to them about having some element of commercial to make it more of a multi-use as opposed to straight residential, compare that site to the Pine Tree site. What the Pine Tree has that this site doesn't is traffic count. And so that may be a very viable spot. And if we wanted, just hypothetically, some of the things we could do. I mean, we could attempt to gain control of that through, purchase agreement. And again, for those that may not be aware, on the Lilly, we executed a purchase agreement on that property, knowing that we may be forced to close, but we set a timeline such that we had the ability to send out RFPs, and the intent from day one was to find a developer, plan that we liked, that met the city needs, hand it over to the developer, and the developer bears all the financing and costs, and we step away, and that's exactly what happened. We could do something similar in that regard, and issue, if we had control, we could issue an RFP and tell them exactly what we want and see what the responses are. Again, or we could stay out of it completely. I personally am in the camp that I think that we should at least, test the waters on our ability to have control of that property. That a lot of times kind of requires that there's an extended time period on a closing before we have to put in any cash of significance to allow us to go through that RFP process. But maybe one of the differences now between when we did the Lily is interest rates are through the roof, and people are backing away from those things. So, but that could be the seller is going to be faced with those same challenges, right? And even we did even talk at one point that worst case with Lily, if we and this is probably more applicable because it was never really an option at Lily, but more applicable at Pine Tree, even if you leveled it at some point and you've got a pad ready or something that's ready for developers when the market's right. That's generally a better spot to be than having blight within the city, but that's my opinion.
There's code enforcement issues. Does that continue to move forward as far as trying to get them to fix the issues in the building? How does that work now with enforcement?
Well, they continue to be in discussions with the property
Yeah, I
owner.
mean, right now, it's a place that has issues. Are we still holding them accountable for their code and violations?
Correct. I think that some of these date back to about a year ago as well.
How does that go to the next level then? Does that go to court then if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing on the facility?
I'm not entirely sure what the next step is. It might be getting legal involved. I think Jason Mallinger would be the expert on how that process moves forward.
Mr. Mayor, in theory, that, yeah, you're right, code enforcement is involved. I understand a number of those spaces down there have been essentially red tagged, so unoccupiable. But, just, I'm trying to stay in the EDA lane, but comment on what we've seen when we take some of the other code enforcement issues we've seen within the city. Those can go on for a long time, and even if the city had a full-on code enforcement effort at that facility, I don't think it really changes what its current status is, which it's basically boarded up, with the exception of the pizza factory.
Well, that's blight that you're referring to, though. Blight is not what we want.
Correct.
So that's an issue in my mind.
Right, and that's where I do think that it starts getting into the lane of the EDA. Something's going to happen over there, and let's make an effort to be involved. That doesn't necessarily mean that we wind up doing any deal, if you will, with the EDA and the current property owner. It may involve that, but let's work towards the best outcome over there. I think that's part of our responsibility.
Chair Dew, are you looking for guidance from us, or are you just kind of opening it up for conversation?
I'm really looking for opinion, because I do think that if the board is open to exploring what our involvement might look like, I think we need to give staff some guidance on taking a look at that. I by no means am suggesting that we authorize a purchase amount in any agreement, but I do think that maybe we look at next steps. Maybe we engage it with the seller at a higher level, understand what is it that they're trying to accomplish. The fact that I just heard that they asked whether TIF is available. Well, if they ask that question, are you indirectly saying that you might be willing to redevelop the property you currently own And if that's the case, maybe we just continue that conversation with the current property owner and just give them the guidance and the pathway to get there.
If you're looking for opinion, it would be my opinion that we move forward so that we have some stake in what goes in. I think the Lilly Building was a wonderful example of we got our toes in a little bit, had an opportunity to have choice, and we stepped back out. And I would like to think that we would move forward that direction as well, because at the end of the day, North St. Paul still is a product, and we want to make sure that we have what the residents want, what the residents are asking for, and what the community needs.
I certainly agree. Other thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I would totally agree with those comments. I think being a part of some capacity and gathering more information, see what that path is, I think we should absolutely move forward on that.
Okay, so without objection, then I would ask staff to maybe take next steps, whether it's through the broker that we've engaged in Crossroads Property or directly engage with that property owner and maybe find out their intent. Do they just intend to sell and move on with their life? Or do they in fact have some interest in redeveloping the property themselves? And if so, start working towards a path to what it is they want to build and, how we can assist. And if they do not intend to develop that property themselves, then maybe engage in a discussion about, whether we can gain some control over it for a period of time in order to go through an RFP process and ask the business community, the development community, who's willing to come in and put something on that spot. I think those are kind of the first sets of questions, so. Any further comment or additions?
Did you ever find out when his lease expires? Cal's? So it's month to month, so there's no, okay.
Yeah, he indicated it was month to month, and he wasn't sure when when that month was coming. There is a notice provision in there, but is what he said. Okay, nothing further, we'll move on. Downtown green space.
Yeah, we discussed this last month, and the direction given to staff was to move forward with determining what the next steps are. So we've reached out to Ron Ritchie, our Public Works Director, to see if he could get some cost estimates from some contractors for the work that would be performed, materials costs for the work that would be performed by Public Works, and then also the other items that would be, bid out. So we're still working on getting those items.
Okay,
Ron's been a little busy with snow lately, and Dan's been a little busy with our audit lately, so.
should be making all kinds of money on snow removal, so we should be good. Okay, next item is, so we're essentially tabling that till the next meeting for more info. Okay,
Yeah, just on here is a discussion reminder item.
got it. River of God Church, we did have, I think this is just an update item, is that correct?
Yep.
So we did have a sit-down, as we discussed at our last meeting, with the pastor and one of their board members, who I think was his brother, if I'm not mistaken. Discussed with them just kind of where they were, what was their outlook, what's going on with their facility. We did discuss the neighboring property, Reflex Medical's desire to expand. We didn't know at the time whether that was an immediate concern and desire, or whether it was, kind of a 5-year plan type thing. And I guess my take on it is, and I'll let Terry here comment because he was in the meeting as well. My take on it was they were actually pretty, they understood that this kind of stuff, because they were, we premised it around the master redevelopment plan, or redevelopment master plan. And we just said, hey, we just kind of want to know what the future is. No one's pushing you out, trying to move you. They really enjoy being in downtown. They would love to be somewhat central in downtown. They weren't opposed to moving, but they were pretty frank about their financial ability to, pull up stakes and spend millions of their dollars to move for somebody else. So, but they were open to it. And then I think after that, we did hear from Reflex. Their desire was to move yesterday if they could. So I'll let you add whatever.
Well, I just
might have
want to,
missed.
I think the presentation went real well with explaining to them the downtown, master plan. I think they understood that, Kevin Fuller at Reflex Medical has a big need, and that need is a expansion of his facility, and he knows that he's in the way of that expansion. I believe Reflex Medical owns property up to the building, so I think it's been in the back of their mind, the church's mind, for a long time that Kevin, needs space and may need more in the future. And I think from that meeting, they understood that, yeah, maybe there might be opportunity for us to allow this to happen with Reflex expanding by our plans for the downtown, and he would like to possibly, if we were to help, maybe not help, but maybe try to help them stay in North St. Paul. I got a feeling that he was open to that. Trying to think what else from there, but I think that was the gist of the meeting.
Yeah, and we did discuss the possibility of understanding if they were to move, what do they need? They're currently in a old roller skating rink that's 12,000 feet and kind of chopped up. When we got into the discussions about, do you need 12,000 or do you need 8,000 or 6,000? What exactly do you need? They weren't entirely sure. I don't think they've ever gone through that exercise. I think that I think this, to me, would be maybe a good opportunity to double back with Reflex Medical and say, we did meet with the church. They're not ready to pack their bags, but they're open to the concept and see if we can. What I would offer to Reflex is to say, we can, as an EDA in a city, help find a spot for them, but in order to do that, we kind of need to know what they need. Are you willing to fund a schematic exercise similar to what we're doing for the pizza place, for the church, to then see where they might fit? Since it ultimately would benefit him anyways, see if he'll fund that initial piece. And then we can start looking. That'd be my thought. It's going to be a pretty nominal amount.
I was going to say, it's pretty much information gathering. Can we just do it on staff time here, do you think, or have one of us?
Yeah.
Maybe have that conversation with the church and find out what their actual needs are. We have to actually go out there to
Well, as a, I'll say, former builder, I think that's a programmatic effort, and I do think it requires a professional to do that exercise. And I don't think it's a difficult exercise for those that have done it before, particularly for those that, just like the folks we're hiring on the pizza place. They've done pizza places before. You're probably going to take them 12 minutes. And I would suggest that there's, firms out there that are similar in the ecclesiastic field that can go in there, and when the church says, well, you say, well, what do you need? They're going to go, I don't know. And, they're going to tell them what they need because they know what they need. They've seen it dozens of times. So I would be I'd be partial to having a professional, kind of program done to really get to their needs based on their congregation and their.
Did the need do the needs come, exploring that, come before finding a potential spot for them?
I think so, because they're currently in 12,000. I think admittedly, they said it's inefficient space, so they need it inefficiently, but if it was efficient space, they probably don't need that. And I do think that there's a significant difference between looking for a 6,000 to 7,000 foot footprint versus a 12,000 foot footprint.
Also, I don't know, but there's that other church over off of First on South, down further south. That's a small church in the neighborhood. You know, how is their well-being? Are they doing well? Is that something else we could look into as far as?
As combining the
No,
two?
just understanding if they're, where their interest is if with their congregation type of thing, size-wise. I mean, as far as buying the building, if it's still, or is that something that, just something I threw out there, maybe it's.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think, again, understanding if they were to move, what their need is, to me, feels like the first step. And again, that is largely to the benefit of Reflex. And so I would encourage Reflex to maybe fund that first step. I mean, we really did the first step of the engagement. So, anybody opposed to that, to go back, have a conversation with Reflex to suggest that that's what they do and see what comes of it? Okay. Not spending any money.
Sure he's had the conversation already.
Well, he had, but it was a little, neighbor to neighbor sometimes isn't always the most expeditious. But so Brandy, I don't know if I'm happy to participate in that conversation with Kevin. Did you have anything to add? I know you were in the meeting as well, right?
No, I think that they were hesitant to come in and talk to us at first, but once they had the full information and that they are not being pushed out, this is part of a broader vision, and they're only going to be asked to move if they're made whole or better than whole. And so the tone changed by the end of the
Right, I agree. Okay, so we'll ask staff to do that, but I'm happy to participate in that discussion with Reflex if needed. I would just add too, and I know we're a little over time, and I blame the city attorney, but I will say I felt that was an extremely productive meeting. I was very happy to see that they had already printed out the redevelopment master plan. They had looked at it, and I would suggest that we don't need to schedule it now, but maybe think about getting another one on the table. If I had to pick one, I'd say the bank down in the corner, but just saying.
Yeah.
They got too much space as well. Okay, if there's nothing else there, Market Street Development Site. So this, as most of us know, we had a development agreement, exclusive agreement with JB Vang. They were proposing multifamily housing on the site over there. They have walked away from that agreement and likely the project due to fund shortfalls. And, with the rising costs and everything else, so not terribly surprising. Gary Mulcahy owns the property adjacent to that. I call it the atrium, but it's something else now. I'm not, what school or something? Charter school, and the parking lots, et cetera. He had asked to meet with me. I met with him. He has a concept plan that he threw, and it's just some lines on a site plan. It's nothing exciting. The basic concept, and there's a copy of it in your packet, and I think we're gonna, if you take a look at it, there's two different versions. One's a little wider than the other, and the basic concept is that he utilizes those parcels that are there along with some of his existing property, and these things, and build a facility. These things are commonly referred to as man caves, but there's probably a more modern term that's more acceptable, person caves, we'll call them, I don't know. Yeah, man caves. We did have the opportunity to kind of talk about a couple facilities that, like this, that they're trying to emulate. And, I said, look, we can't have something across from the city hall that's, wood frame, vinyl sided, junk. But what I had agreed to is to bring it to this group, just to kind of test the waters on the use before they did some next steps. I did look from a zoning standpoint. That is I think, what is it, MU2 or something?
I think it's MU1.
Could be one or, yeah, whatever the downtown one is. So it is, it is within the kind of use guidance, commercial, residential, et cetera. A lot of uses involved there. He of course assured me that it would be, top-notch architecturally. He thought it would pair well, again, with car show activity and other activities of that type. We did talk a little bit about trade-offs, right? What does it look like? One of the things he suggested, I don't know whether this is true or not, but probably more true than not, and that is anything that goes there, we're probably going to have to deal with them as the adjacent property owner, particularly with that, as you see on the drawing there, there's that 48-inch storm line, existing storm line that runs through there, which with any development may have to be relocated or moved or who knows. But one of the things that, I looked at the redevelopment master plan, and one of the things that was kind of identified for that area was potentially was parking. We've talked about structured parking within the city as we're running out of parking, particularly at peak times. And then the other thing we're talking about is getting some downtown green space. The two concepts that he was quite open to was preserving the north end of that site. We can't see it on that drawing, but I think he had drawn in, can you scroll that up a little bit, that plan that you have on the screen?
Roll it up. This is the whole.
Or down, maybe? I need to see the bottom of that page, yeah. Yeah, so he drew that coffee shop. He goes, he drew a coffee shop in there, and he says, well, I put a coffee shop in here for the city because they want a coffee shop. I said, we don't want that coffee shop. But maybe we do, maybe we don't. But at any rate, preserving some area down there on the south end of the property for, potential green space or a good community gathering spot, albeit it's not right on 7th. It was an opportunity. The other thing that we discussed, and he is open to, given certain parameters, is if we could go to the aerial real quick. And this kind of helps with the downtown parking issue, is he's got that large parking lot right there outside of the old atrium building. Opening that up to, a shared parking agreement that could be, that could be used primarily, most of the share, I have one down at the Kendall's building, and I think it basically says it can be used for event days, but, can't be used during normal business hours or something to that effect, right? And all maintenance still falls on the people that own the property, but, you could even connect the city lot potentially, there's all kinds of things that could happen. So, he's willing to throw in some stuff too that benefits the city. And so the way I left it with him was that I would bring in, I said it's probably not the use that most people are thinking of for those parcels, but I told him I would bring it here, try to get some feedback. If it wasn't an outright no, the idea was that his team would bring information likely to our next meeting about where these have been done in other communities and how they, how they've been additive and beneficial to those communities. So with that, that's kind of the presentation. So comments, thoughts?
Well, since we just had training about disclosing conflicts of interest, Gary Mulcahy is a client of mine and has been since 1979. And I'm not supposed to say anything about it, apparently. But I will talk about one thing that I was involved with on the EDA committee formation years and years back. And I said in front of all of the members that North St. Paul will have development, but it's going to depend upon someone who has deep roots in our community. And that has happened with the Burwald project, and I can guarantee you it'll happen with anything involved with any other citizen that grew up in this town and has deep roots to our community. So that's all I can say about it. That's probably enough.
Perfect. Any other kind of gut reaction to the idea, the concept?
I mean, my gut reaction is it's something that we haven't explored in the past. We've always looked at it as being something else other than that. I guess I'm not overly excited about storage, but I don't know what it looks like. You know, I'm looking at a couple square things here.
Yeah, I don't want to speak on their behalf. I will tell you, I was involved with one of these, not on an outer burb, and they're really not storage units. I mean, they're pretty active spaces.
Car condos.
Yeah, car condos.
There you go.
I mean, that's really, and this would be, at least as Gary suggested, they would be condoed. And, you know, so there'd be individual units sold off. I'm not sure what that looks like, but they're pretty active spaces. I think he has a belief that it may pair well with, you know, car show activities and the things, you know, that do happen in this community. I did encourage him. I'd asked him if he'd spoke to the history cruisers. He said he had not. I encouraged him to maybe reach out and have a conversation with them, get their thoughts and opinions on it. You might get 20 buyers right away, I'm not sure. But, so. Councilmember Cole has a look.
Well, you looked at me. I'm struggling wrapping my head around what this would look like, so I really haven't drawn an opinion. So I would love to see the next concept as to what it would look like. When I read through the packet and I read the word storage, I immediately thought of a giant storage facility, and I know that's not what this is looking to do. So that's why I struggle. I haven't drawn a conclusion, and I'd certainly be interested in taking a look at what next steps would look like, just to help me better, put a picture in my mind.
Mr. Mayor, any thoughts, comments?
Well, I saw the ones over by Paisley Park. If it's anything like that, they're beautiful, and they have pool tables, they have recreation. The guy who owns a security company, he has 4 of them together. So as far as the way look, you can't sleep there, but you can spend
Right.
time there. You can hang out there. You have a rec room there with your car type of thing.
I did ask him about that, and he said no, they would not be living units, so.
So it sounds to me the next step here is get them in here and do a little presentation and get some more information on a visual, what it would look like, how it would impact the city. I think we all need more info.
Yep, okay. And I think that was the key. He understood that that may not be the first thing people thought of when they looked at that site. So we'll double back with Gary Mulcahy and let him know that it was not summarily rejected and we'd like to see more. And
This is thinking outside the box.
it is.
That's kind of cool.
I can tell you what, if it looks anything, well, you mentioned the one at Paisley, but that's not, what is that, Chanhassen?
Chanhassen,
Yeah, there's one in Chanhassen, there's also one in Medina that, yeah, you can't get in these places, they're so nice, you gotta have a special pass, so. We might become exclusive in North St. Paul.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, sounds good. So, and Brandy, do you know Gary Mulcahy or, we'll get you connected and so we can take over the reins with that. Okay, treasurer's report.
I put the report in the packet, and so I included last month and this month's expenditures and revenue for the year so far. And you'll see that the expenditures that we have on the books are for personnel and $51 in contractual services. I looked that up. It was a discussion. It was a legal discussion with Soren. So the balance, the ending fund balance for February is $439,449, $439,449 and 43 cents. Any questions?
The only question is we did ask last month when the levy funds
Oh,
attach. Did we find that out?
that I do not have the answer to. I'm sorry, I will find out.
Just want to make sure that they didn't fall into the general fund and being spent on other things.
So I think that might be part of when the balance, or when the budget has been finished being audited. So it kind of gets finished at the end of March here. So we'll probably have those details next month.
Okay. Okay, any questions on treasury report? Okay, other items, I'm going to go first. I just had one other. Did we get so I know that the two new members are replacing existing members whose terms expire at the end of '23. And then that doesn't mean you're done. You may very well be reappointed if you don't behave yourself. Do we know what the other terms are?
Do you have those available, Chris?
I got till 26. You stuck with me. Sorry.
No choice.
All right, so we have Robert Dew, term end 2024. Terry Furlong, term end 2025. Shifsky was just reappointed for his full term, so 2025 as well. Thorson and Matthews, 2023. And Tim Cole and John Mungy are
Parallel with their elected terms.
with
Okay.
their office.
I think, John, I think the mayor is. I think if you choose somebody else to sit in this chair next year, that's your decision.
Yeah, usually every
So,
year.
yeah, so I don't necessarily know if my role is ongoing. I think it's appointed annually.
It is in the bylaws.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're stuck. Okay, it's not on here, but anything else from any other EDA members? City manager,
I'd just like to add,
executive director, excuse me.
thank you, yes. Just in mindfulness of the hours that we have, or the time set aside for this, I don't have a problem. We are salaried. We also have a gentleman here that's going to be getting overtime for this duration.
Oh, yeah.
Just keep it within our time frame when we can.
I blame the city manager. I missed that entry, so
Okay.
Bill Soren, please. Any other, any additional admonishments or? Okay, perfect. If not, our next meeting is scheduled for April 11th at 3 o'clock, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and seconded by Councilmember Cole. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
Me. I'm a tax guy, but I'll do everything I can to be here. But I'm officially voting no.
We have one nay. So 5-1. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Back to your tax.
Yep.